Welcome back to Stewardship Leader Podcast, hosted by the Christian Stewardship Network, where we teach church leaders the biblical perspective on finances so they can speak with authority, confidence, and integrity. In our last episode, we unpacked what the data reveals about generosity in the church today, where participation is growing, but individual giving is declining, and retention remains a challenge. Today, we're going to take the next step because the goal isn't just to understand the data, it's to respond to it. What are we going to do with what we're learning from this annual giving report? I'm joined again by DeWayne McNally, MortarStone Chief of Staff, who brings both data insight and practical experience, helping churches translate generosity trends into intentional discipleship strategies. DeWayne, thank you again for being with us today.
Leo, great to be back and looking forward to a great conversation.
Well, just as a formal introduction, DeWayne has over 35 years of experience in both large corporations and in churches. He led software development, service delivery, and global customer success teams for over 30 years before God called him into the local church ministry. He served on the executive team at Hill Country Bible Church in Austin, Texas, and has a deep passion to see people discipled into faithful stewardship and generosity. So, DeWayne, in our last episode, we took a close look at what the latest giving data reveals about the church today. Let's dig into what do we do with this information. Let's talk about how churches can move from simply encouraging giving to actually equipping people to become generous disciples. What is the real problem churches are facing today, DeWayne?
Whew, that's a deep subject, Leo.
Let's start it off easy.
Yeah, why would you start out easy? I think, and this is the thing that I see in my local church, but I think it's what I see across the church in general is engagement is a key conversation that's there, whether or not it's engaging regarding discipleship, whether it's engaging regarding giving, whether it's volunteering, whatever it is, but engagement is a core factor that is off, and generosity is just one factor in that broader conversation. And so how do we help people take next steps? Our philosophy as a church is, who are you, where are you at spiritually, and how do we help you take your next step? What I find is a lot of us aren't asking those questions of people. We're not digging into the conversation about, what are you doing, what have you learned, who's ever discipled you. Those aren't typical conversations anymore. It's just we focus on, were they there on Sunday morning, or did they come to group, but not how often are they opening the word, how much time are they spending in prayer. And so to me, if you ask me, one of the core things that we're trying to address as a church, and the church I'm a part of, but I see across the church, is engagement and being willing to ask the hard questions, I think is one of the key things.
Yeah, that's good. I think the one thing that I'm just keenly aware of these days, especially with this church that I'm part of right now, it's a new church. It's only been around for about a year. We just celebrated 1 year. And
Congratulations.
thank you. And it's doing really well. It's an incredible place, just wonderful people. I've come from like a mega church background, and that big church feel and trying to make it small and make it relatable just became harder and harder, especially being on staff and having a pretty busy schedule, overseeing a large team. Uh, I just miss that. And I have that part of this church. So I really, really appreciate that and love that. And I want that to continue. But the one thing that I am asking our own team there at the church is, what does discipleship look like? Because I think the church has moved away from making that a priority. And isn't it really what the church is called to do, is to disciple people, right? Matthew 28, get them into the kingdom and do what? Teach them everything I've taught you, right? To observe everything I taught you. That's what Jesus told the disciples. But he told them to make disciples, go make disciples, right? And so when people come to our churches, if we just focus on pulling off a great weekend experience, which great, that needs to happen. People need to feel welcome. People need to have an experience, with God as they worship, as they hear the word. We want to inspire and we want to draw people closer to the Lord. And the weekend experience does that. But it shouldn't be the only thing. If we don't have
Yep.
an intentionality of leading people through some kind of discipleship process that we introduce, not they conjure up or figure out as they go to our church, then I think we're missing it, because we can become a church that's just about the weekend experience. And you get great experience, but at least people ill-equipped to handle the everyday kind of things. So based on that, the fact that many churches struggle to really put together, it doesn't have to be complicated, even a simple discipleship pathway to say, here's how we're going to train you. We're not going to train you on everything, but we're going to hit on the big things that we believe the scripture's very clear on, that will help you to walk faithfully, victoriously this Christian life. And these are the milestones. And one of those has to be stewardship and generosity.
Yep.
Generosity, it has to be at the core of that because, well, it was shown to us by Jesus. It says that the Father so loved the world that he gave, right? He gave his only son. So generosity is part of that equation. And so why is generosity a discipleship issue? Let's talk about that. Why is it that pastors need to understand that this is a discipleship issue? It's not a giving issue. It's a discipleship issue.
And totally agree with that, Leo. And I love the picture that you said in about discipleship. And one of the things that I see is the fact that, and this was in our message on Sunday at church, was the fact of everyone's being discipled by something.
Mm,
The question is, are they being discipled by the clicks that they do, or are they being discipled by somebody who's pouring purposefully into their lives?
yeah.
And I think that's the part that challenges me in this dialogue, is the fact of I want to be a part of pouring into people's lives to see them grow, because that's where I get some of my greatest joy. But your conversation, or the question that you said, is generosity is a disciple. This is a discipleship issue, not a generosity issue. And
Mm,
we talked a little bit about it last time, Leo. The security and contentment conversation is a part of that. Where am I being discipled to find my security? Where am I being discipled to find my contentment? What are the things that matter in that? If someone's not a part of a biblical community and they're just reading their Bible on their own, will they ever get the same amount out of it as if they're sitting down face to face with somebody and being able to put something on the table? And then, do we believe iron sharpens iron? And
mm,
if we do, then that means that we have to be in community with one another. If we
agreed.
don't learn how to give sacrificially, then what's going to happen? Ultimately, we're going to start to hold on to more and more. And the number of people who process generosity through clenched fists as opposed to open hands. And so, anyway, I believe that you can walk into a church and evaluate their discipleship based upon what's happening in their generosity, in their giving, Leo,
Yep.
because the two are so intertwined, yet it has to start with the discipleship conversation.
Yeah, the other thing about generosity is that a lot of times when we say the word generosity, we think automatically financial generosity, meaning a gift, a financial gift. And it's true that is part of it. We cannot remove that and say, well, I could be generous in other ways. Really, that's just an excuse. But it does include being generous in other ways. And I think you will see a correlation. If you truly start looking at your congregation, you'll see a correlation between those who are financially generous, that they're also generous in other ways. Right? If they're
Yep.
truly generous, they're generous in every area of their lives. They're volunteering, they're engaged, they're serving, they're finding ways to add value every single week. They're not just going to come in, check a box, and then leave. Most of the time, those are your core people. In fact, this is something I've seen throughout my Christian life. Those who are the most engaged in the church, they're usually serving, leading life groups, teaching classes. They're the one, they're the 20% that kind of do 100% of the work, so to speak. And those are also your top givers. So it's like before you even look at their giving records, this person is probably a giver because they're here all the time. And I think that's an important distinction to understand because it helps you to understand who, even if you don't, because some churches don't look at the actual individual giving data. And I respect that. I understand. I still think someone needs to understand who's giving and who's not giving. But I understand where a senior pastor or a certain group of people in the church, they'd rather not know, but someone should know because that's what leads you to know whether your congregation is being discipled in that area. So, for that perspective, I think it's healthy to do that. But let's get a little bit more practical. How does this journey that we want people to go on to become generous, how is the journey from the first gift, which again, people are taking a step to be generous, to start living beyond just me, and start giving. And from that journey from the first gift to the consistency. Why is that such an important part of the process?
Well, Leo, and first and foremost, you have to start off with the people who are in your church who aren't giving. So 40% of the people are in the average church is not giving based upon what
Right.
the stats would tell us. So how are you engaging them and teaching them every Sunday about what giving means? And so, as we've said, people give the first gift because they're asked. And so how do you ask them well? So that gets them to give the first gift. But then how do you help them take their next step by thanking them, but also giving them some additional wisdom towards what it means to become moving from a first time giver to a second time giver? I was talking to a church once and they were talking about the fact that every time someone gave them a first gift, they sent out a book on giving that was about half an inch thick. And
Mm.
I was like, so you've just told somebody who put their toe in the water, you're now sending them an instruction manual how to go off the high dive instead of just simply thanking them
Yeah.
and inviting them into a deeper, because they've now said, I'm interested in you.
Mhm.
Now, how do you invite them into a deeper relationship? Do you offer to meet them, someone to meet them in the welcome center? Do you invite them into, hey, I'd love to grab coffee with you just to say thank you for your partnership with us? But thinking through in the context of your individual church, moving it from the standpoint of, oh, we don't want to talk about giving, but actually treating it like, what do you do with your first time attenders? How do you do the same thing and then do that? And then as they start to once they give their second gift, especially if it's within the 60 days of the first gift, then you can start a conversation about what's it look like to move from a random gift to a recurring gift. Now, whether or not that is a setting it up to come off their credit card, out of their check, or just encouraging them to set up a regular rhythm of giving and beginning that journey. And so, when I look at it, Leo, it's really first gift, man, thank them profusely for just
Mm.
taking that step. The second gift, you're thanking them for continuing their investment, but also encouraging them to move from a random gift to a recurring gift. And then once they do that third time gift, you're thanking them for being a part of your ongoing mission. And so,
Mhm.
how do you thank them and encourage them and cheer them on at each step of the way?
It's good. What would you say is the biggest miss for churches in that journey?
The first giver, the
Okay.
first gift.
Yeah, I would agree.
And if they're not doing the first gift, they're not doing the second or third. But truly, if you believe that most second time givers give because they've been thanked, and they're like, oh, my gift makes a difference. And I think we talked about this a little bit in the last episode, Leo. There's a lot of people who don't believe that their church needs their money,
Mm.
and the church doesn't. But if it's a discipleship issue and it's what you want for the person instead of what you want from the person, then we definitely want their money because it's often a blockage to their heart. And so
Mm.
let's help that journey along by discipling them towards generosity and giving.
Okay, so talk about that. What could churches do to help people take that first step?
So the first step, I think we've said to some degree already, but let's talk through the fact of what's it look like for someone to actually move from not giving to giving.
Mhm.
And some of the best churches, and we've done last year, we took the top 45 churches that we saw that outperformed the rest of the churches. So their giving was above the average. And so we did a outliers report. And one of the things that we found in there consistently, all the outliers, they have a 12-month plan for when are they going to do what their sermon series are going to look like. In the middle of their Matthew series, how are they going to talk about giving during that? How are they going to look at their giving moments? And so that's 60 to 90 seconds every week that they have the opportunity to help someone understand either through a story, through relaying biblical wisdom. One of the best things, and my pastor did this past week, he talked about his own personal giving journey
Mm.
and the impact that it had on his own personal walk. And so telling stories about our own journey is going to be a key part of that. But the the churches that we saw outperforming, and outperforming is always one of those, but who who beat inflation more than others, I'll say, were the ones who actually had a plan of how they were going to disciple and teach their people about giving and generosity. And the thing I know in our software, Leo, if I looked at your church's data, I could probably tell you within a week when the last time was you guys talked about giving,
Interesting.
because the spikes are tremendous.
Yeah.
And we know that.
Yeah.
What I typically find is a spike is really big for about the first 3 to 4 weeks after a giving series, and then it's back down or lower than what it was before.
Yeah.
And so all that says is if you're not consistently having the dialogue, not consistently teaching, not consistently discipling your people, they're getting lost in other messages. And
Yeah.
so the
Totally agree.
consistency and the clarity month after month is one of the things that I see is absolutely key, Leo.
Yeah. We kind of answer my next question, which is why communication is so important. I think the highlight, though, in what you just answered was this clear understanding that these churches are doing something different, meaning that they're actually planning on what they're going to do. They have a
Yeah.
plan and they look at the calendar and say, okay, we need to talk about this. This needs to be a consistent message. So they
Yep.
probably have their theology down. They know what they believe, they know what they want to communicate. And then they put a plan in place that says, we're going to do this and we're going to do this through the series. We're going to do it through weekend messages. We're going to have an event. Maybe we'll do a jog, whatever. They have a plan on how they're going to get this message out there. And something that you said that's very important is that people who do not hear that consistently, and it's not intentional that a church is talking to their people, that those people will hear other messages that will drown out anything else they might have heard a month or 2 or 3 months ago. And I keep saying this as a giver, as a congregation member, not even as a stewardship leader or someone who's equipping people in this area of stewardship and generosity. I need to be challenged to give. Now, I don't need to be challenged to return the tithe, which I believe in. Again, it's not about a tithe message, but I believe that the tithe is the floor of our giving. I think that's a no-brainer. It doesn't belong to us. It's for me, it's the one thing that I do that says, God, I recognize where it's coming from and I never want to forget it. But beyond that, I need to be challenged. I need to be inspired. I need to be just told, like, hey, are you still listening to God or have you gotten comfortable with your other 90%? And
Yep.
I'd say that to my pastor. Hey, every once in a while, you gotta give me something to shoot for, man. You gotta inspire me to put more into the kingdom than in my own pocket, in my own comfort. And I can say that because I'm a stewardship guy and I teach this and I understand this. Our people in our congregation are not called to this like we are. They're not gonna think this way. But if I say that I, as a guy who does this for a living, need to be inspired in that way, how much more them? They
Well,
don't
and
think
I
about
think
it like
it's,
I do every day.
yeah. And Leo, the thing I think even more so, the younger generations, they give to further a mission.
Mm,
If you're talking to them about your budget, you say, "Hey, we need to raise or we need $50,000 to meet our budget this month." That's not going
uh-huh,
to appeal to the younger
uh-uh,
generation.
nope,
Talking to them about, the stories of impact, the stories of advancing the mission, the stories of that's what's going to appeal to. And so once again, the communication conversation is so key, Leo, and but you also have to tailor it to the audiences.
mm,
I constantly tell churches part of that 12-month cycle, you need to think through every few weeks, you're talking to the boomers, you're talking to the Gen X, you're talking to the millennials, the Gen Z, the generations beyond that, because those are all opportunities. And if your message is always targeted towards you, I'm a boomer. If I always targeted my message to me, Leo, you might get it because you're a Gen X, but
mm,
the younger generations aren't going to get it quite as well. And so
no,
So communications, as you said, is so key. It's consistent, it's clear, but the clarity of that means that you have to have your theology laid out. You have to have a vision of, do you have a vision bigger than your budget? If you do, talk about it. And that'll actually bring people to the table to say, I don't see how we're able to do that. I want to be a part of that.
mhm,
And so I think it's all of those aspects of it, Leo.
yeah, yep. But it is intentional. Again, it's
It is.
something that churches who are seeing the result of that consistency, that strategy, are seeing the higher giving because people need to hear it more often. I mean, especially today, there's so much coming in our way every single day that it's hard. I was literally this happened to me today. I was in the middle of answering an email and something popped in my head that I needed to do. And I literally turned to my notepad to write it down and I totally forgot what it was. And I thought, it was important. I hope it
Yeah.
comes back.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not the only one I know I'm a little older than maybe some of the people listening, but it happens, right? We're distracted. There's so many things that we're juggling. And we think people can come into our churches, hear the message, and walk away and just retain it for the next 6 months and continue to give because they were inspired once. No, it's not going to happen. They're moving on. As soon as they got into their car and they're headed to the restaurant to eat something, it's done. It's over with. You've lost that opportunity.
Leo, you're talking about getting distracted. How many of our people listen to 2 or 3 different pastors every week through
Mhm.
podcasts or something else? And so
All
you
the
might
time.
be teaching one thing on Sunday morning, but who are they listening to through the rest of the week? And so ensuring that your message is consistent week after week, that you are clear. So the messaging matters, communication matters so much. And so,
Mhm.
um, yeah, it's easy to get distracted and lose sight of what was talked about yesterday.
Yeah. One of the things that I recognize is, especially in the ministry that I'm in, is that sometimes I'm speaking to someone and I think, this is basic. They know this. Like, why am I saying this? They're probably bored out of their mind. I need to move on to, the stuff that really matters. But then I'm reminded, like, just because I think about this all the time, because it's my full-time role and something I'm passionate about, doesn't mean this person is in the same boat. And they probably don't know what I know. And it's probably new to them. Or it's new enough where the way I'm saying it, it's still beginning to form beliefs and ideas and it's moving them hopefully in the direction that brings better understanding, more conviction, and eventually more engagement and action. So I want us to just kind of pause a little bit and talk about the year-round strategy that you mentioned, because I think pastors out there are thinking, all right, it makes sense. Okay, if you talk about it more often, if you do it well, this could work. So, what does a year-round strategy look like? Let's get as granular as we can to help pastors understand a few things that they can do well. They don't need to do everything, but they need to do a few things well. So, what are those? Let's go over those.
So Leo, I know you've got some of these as well, but one is simply laying out, when are you going to teach on it this year? I mean,
Yeah,
let's just be clear. And what do you want your people to get out of that teaching? The second thing is the giving moments. And actually, to some degree, the giving moments are more important than your sermon series,
mm,
because it's the consistency and it's a piece that most people, if they're hearing it every week, the likelihood that it's going to stick is going to be much better than a 2-week series in September type of thing. The other thing though is think through what a end of year giving strategy looks like for your people. One of the things that we saw in our data was the fact that we saw more end of year giving taking place in November this year than what we've seen in previous years, which is actually good because November and December both are pretty equal for nonprofits, because the people who are doing big non-cash oriented things, they start that activity in November,
yeah,
and so that it completes by December kind of thing. And so actually having a clear strategy where you are helping people understand your vision. So once again, understanding the vision, and you have a vision bigger than your budget, is important, but then inviting people into that. And
yeah,
then Leo, the other part in it is beginning to wrestle with wealth versus income conversation, and beginning some of those conversations so that you're thinking through not just a how do we teach on income based giving, but how do we teach on wealth based giving? And so it's those are some of the things that I see as critical in this conversation.
yeah. Love that. Let me add a couple that I think would also be useful, and I think about this from the church's perspective, both as a congregation member, also as a church leader. I think what would be a rhythm, and what would that rhythm include in order to make sure that we are able to win, so to speak, in the short game, but also in the long game. Short is that we continue to communicate clearly that generosity is part of who we are. So it's inspiring people to not lose sight of the fact that being a Christian means that you don't live for yourself, right? I think it's called, I
That's
forget the
good.
scripture, I'm not going to quote it, but basically it says that it is no longer I who live, right? Christ lives through me and in me. And so if I accept Christ as my savior and it is no longer I who live, that means I have to listen to Jesus, to my master, and follow him, right? My teacher, and follow him. And if part of that is that he's calling me to be generous, to give my life away, I'm going to look for ways to do that, whether it's to serve, whether it's on the weekend, leading a life group, serving in classes, whatever way that I can serve. I'm going to look at a way to do that. If there's ways that I can contribute in helping the bride with my own gifting, my own abilities, if it's in giving, all of that, I need to be encouraged to continue to do that. I need opportunities to do that. And I think this is where the weekend message and especially the giving moment can marry those two. It can say, hey, here's what our vision is. And you talked about having a vision that's bigger than the budget. If it's a God vision, it's always bigger than the budget, right? It's always bigger than
Yep.
the budget. So you should be going up there and saying, God has put some crazy stuff in our hearts to do. And to to the degree that God provides through you, right? We're going to do it, but we're not going to do it by ourselves. God wants to involve you in that. So it's inspiring people in the short term to give. I think you mentioned the year in giving. People have cycles. We all have cycles. There's yearly cycles. There's times of the year that you're kind of in the mindset of learning, and other times, like in the summer, where you're like, I just want to relax and take it easy because it was a hard spring and hard winter, and I just need to relax a little bit. And then come the fall, we're right back into it. So those kinds of rhythms are important to take advantage of because people are more inclined that this is expected at this time of year. So year in giving, yeah, Christmas is around. People just get into that, I don't know, mood, I guess, or whatever you want to call it, of giving is acceptable at this time of year. It's harder to do that message in June. That's why giving in the summer usually goes down. But again, let's learn from that. Let's look at why people react the way they do, and let's meet them where they are and help and coach and guide them, not to manipulate them. I want to make sure that our audience understands this. It's not to manipulate them. It's not what we want for them. The church leader should never consider that the people in the pew are the ones that are providing the resources for the church. No, God is providing the resources, but God will use people because he's working in their lives as much as he's working in the ministry. But coming back to the topic, which is, what are we doing? Well, how are we inspiring them in the short term? How are we doing our giving moments? Who are we speaking to? You alluded to this, the fact that when you're speaking to a Gen Xer or a Boomer, you're not going to reach a Gen Z or Gen Y. They're just not, it's not the same communication style. So you sometimes need to just speak to those first time givers. You need to speak to the Gen Z because they're motivated by action. They're motivated by something that's tangible, not just a building that needs, have the lights on and the air conditioning running. So that's an important aspect. The other one that I think we can miss, and this is more of a long term, that I don't want pastors to miss, which is we want to make sure that we are equipping people for a life of good stewardship and generosity. And that means that we're not just asking them to give, but we're also equipping them to give. And that's going to take multiple, or at least two major ways we do that. One is through the weekend messages. We're going to open the Bible and say, here's what God says about this topic about money, how we manage it, and what he says about generosity and how we live it out. And then we also have to do that in classes. Some people don't have a capacity to give, right? They have a willingness, but no capacity. Well, what does that mean? Well, they're probably in debt. They probably have lived, as the world tells them to live. And we need to take the time to find out where they're at and help them come out of that, get free from that so that they have the capacity. So it is a short term, it's a long term, but we have so many opportunities. But the most important one is that we don't just think, well, I think of this weekend or next weekend. It comes up in the plan for the weekend, schedule. And it's like, should we say something about giving? It's like, no, you should have been thinking about that, months ago. And now it's just time to execute. And I think this is why you're seeing the data from these churches that are beating inflation. Their giving is going up and beating inflation because they have a plan, they have a strategy, and they're executing on that strategy.
And the lead pastor is, I think one of the key things, and you talk about this all the time, Leo, it's great to have a stewardship pastor, But if the lead pastor doesn't view that he's the one who's leading this charge, in all the outlier churches, the lead pastor was deeply involved in the conversation. So it wasn't just
Mhm.
somebody was coming up with a message on the side and executing it. No, he was bought in and actually leading that charge in that conversation. So,
Yeah.
um,
Mhm.
and
Yeah,
totally
that's
agree
crucial.
with what you added, Leo, because
Yeah.
segmenting your messaging, whether or not it's you're sending out quarterly statements to your congregation of their giving, segmenting those communications based upon a newer
Yeah.
giver,
Who you speaking
talk
to?
to them differently because and if you're talking to your newest giver the same way you're talking to your best givers, you're missing one of them. And so I think that's the piece that we always have to recognize is there's opportunities and you can slice and dice data 50 different ways. And that's one of the things I love about MortarStone is we can help you slice the data based upon
Mhm.
generation, based upon where they're at in their giving journey, all those things, so that you can actually hit people with a tailored message that helps them take their next step. And I
Yeah.
think that's just, communications is so key in this. And we have to tailor it to people so that they see who they are
Mhm.
and then take that step.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just want to say that what DeWayne just shared, if that sounds like manipulation, it sounds like you're careful what you say because you want to have a certain effect. Well, that's true. We do. But the intention is not manipulation. The intention is that they would draw closer to Christ. Whether they give or not, that will not affect the church in the long run. If others give, God will somehow provide. Jesus said, I will build my church. I believe he'll continue to do it. I don't think anything can stand against it. But the challenge is that if we feel so weird about challenging people to step into the role of a true disciple, then we're not doing what Jesus called us to do, and that's to make disciples. And I just want to challenge pastors to not worry about how they will sound. They should just focus on what they're trying to say and why they're trying to say it. And that strategy can help because you're not coming up with that script 5 minutes before you get on stage and trying to take a collection, right? We didn't
Right.
talk about campaigns and all of that. And I think just for the sake of time, there is a time for capital campaigns, right? The church is growing. There's needs for the ministry that are beyond what the regular giving, the regular budget can handle. So there's time for that, but I don't think any church should be built on it. I think it wears people down, and you're literally squeezing the money from the same group of people. It's your top 10, 15% of the congregation that's already giving. So you're just asking them to give more. A better strategy is to do that only when you need to, but have that strategy year long where you're both discipling and equipping people and then challenging them to step out and be generous and capitalizing on everything DeWayne has said that this report has so clearly indicated, which is that we need to be intentional about understanding that um, people give differently, people think about differently, and if we don't communicate it properly, if we don't equip and disciple them, we're going to continue seeing the same trends, the same data. And I don't know about you, DeWayne, but I mean, I'm encouraged that you guys are doing this. And I was encouraged to see giving go up. But then as I got into the report, I realized, okay, there's still a lot of work to do. So I'm thankful that what you guys are doing. I thank you that you continue to do this report. Please continue to do it for years and years to come. And let's keep having the conversation around this so that church leaders understand how to use this data, how to use these resources so that they can have a good strategy on how to disciple people in this area of stewardship and generosity. Um,
Leo,
yeah,
we plan to keep doing it. So thank you. It's been a labor of love, to be honest, because when we did our first one, we had no clue what we were going to find when we looked at the data. And then once we started looking at the data, it's like, oh, there's some things here that actually tell a story. And
yeah,
as we continue to get into it, and we love the fact that it's real data, it's not survey data. So we
hmm
know survey bias is not in it. And
yeah,
the only bias
yep,
is how you choose to read it and how I choose to read it. And so we try to present the data as real and raw as possible in the conversation. So thank you.
yep. Well, DeWayne, thank you. Thank you for the great work that you and your team are doing at MortarStone. And It's to serve churches. So I love that. Thank you for doing that. And thank you for taking the time to come and share this report here at Stewardship Leader. We are grateful for your partnership, grateful for how you're investing in the church. Thanks.
Thank you.
To learn more about MortarStone and the great work that they're doing, and of course, to connect with DeWayne or someone on their team, go to mortarstone.com. You'll be able to connect with them there, take advantage of some of the resources. They do webinars to educate the church and to help pastors understand this area of how to use data to disciple people. And they're a premium organization when it comes to data mining and being able to really just help you see a true picture of what's really going on. So I really encourage you to learn more about them, connect with them, learn from them. And if you're ready to take the next step in strengthening your own stewardship discipleship in your church, well, you can come to christianstewardshipnetwork.com and explore our resources, the CSN membership, where you can join a community of church leaders who are passionate about biblical stewardship and generosity and would love to help you grow your financial discipleship ministry in your church. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with a church leader. It's free, and it's truly something that's going to help us reach more church leaders with this vital message. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on Stewardship Leader.